Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'll be reviewing for you
No Sleep for Kaname for the Switch 2. Now get me out of here! Paul must review this game to get you out. Paul, please hurry!
Oh boy. Hang in there, Esabelle. I will get this review done as soon as I can, and I will try to keep it concise for your sake. I have never done a review under duress before, so please wish me the best of luck. Where to begin in such an extenuating circumstance? This is the third game in the a.k.a. the Somnium Files series, despite it having a very different name. Technically, its full name is No Sleep for Kaname from a.k.a. the Somnium Files, as if they realized that their name is kind of stupid, especially since the second game was called Nirvana Initiative, which is one of the coolest names I have ever heard for a video game. I really, really loved Nirvana Initiative. It was my game of the year of 2022, and I loved especially how much love it paid to the Zero Escape series. The first Somnium Files was pretty good, but it was bogged down by an extreme difficulty spike as the game progressed, along with some confusing somniums, and the main character Date was really perverted, and he also seemed like he could be easily bribed, especially by characters that were much younger than him, usually by pretending they wanted sexual advances. But it made up for it in the fact that it had a really good dance number, some of the puzzles were really cool to solve, and it had a really great story that took advantage of multiple different timelines and a lot of the stuff that Kotaro Uchikoshi was known for. Nirvana Initiative, while the story itself may not have been quite as grand as Somnium Files 1, had a great way of presenting the twist, which I thought was absolutely mind-blowing, and whenever I explain it to my friends, they always laugh in amazement at how much I'm able to say, like, now the entire game is recontextualized thanks to that twist. But going into this one, we had a little bit of a dilemma, because Kotaro Uchikoshi, the man who gave us the Zero Escape trilogy, my favorite video game franchise, unfortunately got less and less involved with the series as it progressed. For the first Somnium Files, he was director and writer, so you knew that this was really on top of his game. Nirvana Initiative, he was no longer the director, but he did still write the story, so you could still tell that it had that Kotaro Uchikoshi method of telling you a story, making you think you know so much, and then once you see the twist, you can never see the story the same way again, and so it makes replaying absolutely spectacular. This game, on the other hand, he was only a scenario supervisor. It seems like every site I check, he's a different role. So I came in thinking, okay, the story's probably not going to be as good, but I'm going to try to keep an open mind. I'm going to try to see if this game can stand alone on its own merits and me not just say, oh, it's another Zero Escape. So first of all, what does it bring to the Somnium Files series that wasn't done before? And the simple answer to that is escape rooms. While you still have the traditional investigation and somnium portions that were present in the first two games, now you have a third type of gameplay where a character from the previous two games, Iris, is trapped in an escape game, and she's allowed to contact Kaname Date, as the name suggests, the main character of the game, to get his advice on the puzzles. And so you move her around in a third-person perspective, similar to how you moved around Aiba and Tama in the Somniums of the past. And rather than trying to figure out dream logic, these puzzles are much more grounded in reality. Like, these solutions seem like they could feasibly work in an actual escape room, and possibly these escape rooms could actually be done in real life, more or less. There are items that you can pick up, which did not happen in Somnium, strangely enough, and just like in Zero Escape, you can combine the two items to make one mega powerful item, for lack of a better word. In fact, these sections seem to take a lot of inspiration from Zero Escape. So much so that when the game boots up and it gives you like opening credits, it says Team Zero Escape in a similar way to how Danganronpa V3 introduced itself as by Team Danganronpa. When you start up an escape room, it does a close-up on Iris's face, along with the traditional 4 notes that played when you started an escape room in 999. A lot of the sound effects from that trilogy are borrowed. And as someone who is a diehard fan of Zero Escape, this was absolutely wonderful to see Spike Chunsoft paying tribute to that series, which they also made. So it's nice to see the same company acknowledging their past works. Now, if, just in case you find the escape rooms too hard, the game has 4 difficulty levels, and each of them have varying degrees of how much hints the characters will give you. On the easiest difficulty, if you're just really stuck on a puzzle, the game will just flat out tell you the answer if you ask for help too much. Whereas on the hardest difficulty, you pretty much have to figure it out by yourself. If, for some reason, you feel like you're just at your limit at the difficulty level you chose, the game will give you the option to lower the difficulty for you. But you can choose to make that prompt go away, and you can even say, don't ever come up again, because I know what I'm doing, I just have to figure out how exactly to do it. But what I loved about the escape rooms is that it brought back that old feeling I had in Zero Escape, where I had to get out my notebook and I had to use a whole bunch of calculations and writing things down. And while I wouldn't say any of the puzzle rooms are quite as complex as the ones in Zero Escape, as generally you don't need to know a whole lot of crazy stuff that college students would learn, like periodic table or anything like that. Mainly it's just pattern recognition and shape recognition that are going to do it. And these were by far the highlights of the game. They provided such a dopamine rush whenever I solved the puzzle without hints. And whenever I would get hints, I thought to myself, I don't think I would have figured that out without that hint. So I was very grateful that the game had a nice balance between letting me figure stuff out on my own without falling into the pitfall that Zero Time Dilemma did, where sometimes it didn't give you enough to work with. I will still never forgive the transporter room puzzle, for that matter. Now, at some points in each escape room, there will be a time limit, and you'll be asked to find the third eye solution, where you'll be presented with what seem to be the obvious solutions, but then the characters will flat out deny that those are possible. So the game is openly encouraging you to think outside the box and think, what would be the solution that no one is expecting? And on a few of these occasions, when it clicked in my brain of, oh, that's what I should do, that's when it made me feel even more powerful, because I did it, like this review, under duress, and in one of the escape rooms, the timer doesn't even pause if you pause the game. So the only way you can pause and collect your bearings are if you press the home menu button. And even then, you have the disadvantage of not being able to look at the stuff in the game. So as the game progresses, it makes you feel more and more panicked to do well under pressure. It feels like that's what 999 and the rest of the Zero Escape games wanted to be, but due to the nature of puzzles requiring the player to think, it didn't quite give off that impression. Like, sure, the game would say you only have 9 hours until the ship sinks, but you didn't actually have to worry about the clock, whereas, yes, you very much do have to worry about the clock. Thankfully, not the whole time. It builds up to it slowly, so it really prizes you for taking into account every little detail of the escape room and thinking, my observation skills got me through this. But this is only part of the game. We also have the other 2 modes that are returning from the previous games, now with some refinements, but also some setbacks. The investigation scenes are pretty much exactly the same, even down to the fact that most of the environments that you visit are just reused locations from the previous games. You just select what you want to say in a conversation. It doesn't really matter what you say in these conversations, because you're just gonna get to the same outcome anyway. Sometimes you can get hidden endings depending on what you say, but generally speaking, if you're worried that if you say the wrong thing, that is going to get to a terrible ending, these alternate endings only take a couple of seconds, and then you just get right back to it, so Do not worry about that. This game is ridiculously linear. Way more so than the previous Somnium Files games, but we'll get to that. Another thing that might concern returning players is that, just like the locations, pretty much everyone in the cast is also returning from one of the two games. And this is both a blessing and a curse, as it means you don't really get to forge too many new relationships. Thankfully, the relationships from the new characters do get very fleshed out. Although it does seem like a lot of the important moments and lore of those new characters wait until near the end. So it does feel like they're kind of rushed in because the developers had to tie up all the loose ends with the existing characters, and a lot of the returning characters do feel like they're just there because they wanted to get as many cameos in as possible. But at the same time, if you know what happened in the previous games, that can help you form more of an emotional connection during certain scenes. That second Somnium in particular really expects you to know what happened in the previous games for you to really get the impact of what it's trying to do. Now, I could only think of two things that the investigation sections did differently than the previous games. You have way more freedom of how much you can move the camera around. As far as I'm aware, you can rotate almost exactly 360 degrees around you, whereas you had a more limited point of view in the previous games. And you can sometimes find these book covers, for lack of a better word. Like, you'll see something shining, and the green text, when you hover your cursor over it, has a bunch of question marks on it. And apparently all you really do with these are just look at them in the file menu. You get eyeballs if you find all of them, but that's about it. And these sections are where the majority of the story comes in. While I'll wait to save my story verdict for a little bit later, I will say that I'm not thrilled with the idea that they brought Kaname Date back as the main character, as he was the main character in the first Somnium Files, but then there were two protagonists who were different in Nirvana Initiative. Neither one of them were perverts. And Date is one of the biggest perverts I have ever seen in gaming. He sometimes even makes Sigma from Virtue's Last Reward look tame. He has his moments of charm, but they are very few and far between, in my opinion. The fact that he's just such a womanizer is really off-putting. And seeing as this game is rated M, almost every other conversation involves some kind of innuendo or inappropriate speech, which is why I had the severe warning at the start of this video, because I don't think the average Catholic would be very happy with a lot of stuff that they talk about. Personally, I looked past a lot of all that because I wanted to get through the euphoria of the escape rooms and the Somniums, but that is something to keep in mind. Now, let's get to the namesake of the series, the Somniums. So, Somnium is when Date can go inside people's dreams, and this way he can uncover information that the subject either cannot or will not talk about. Now, I've talked about Somniums quite a bit in both of my reviews of the previous games, so just in case you don't feel like digging up those old videos, a brief summary is that you play as Date's eyeball companion, Aiba, who is an AI that resides within his left eye, because one of his eyes is missing, and she takes on the form of a human girl when she's within the dreams, and Date just gives her instructions telepathically for her to do things. So, like, you would examine something and then tell her what she should do with it. And considering that these are within dreams, the solutions don't always make logical sense. So you have to think, what is the pattern of the dream world? And thankfully, Nirvana Initiative added a couple of quality of life improvements to make it slightly easier to figure out these dream logic sequences. I will defer you to that review if you want to see what I'm talking about. And there are also, just like with the escape rooms, several different difficulty settings so that if you find the Somniums too hard, you have options to make it more manageable. Although, as someone who really loved the Somniums in Nirvana Initiative, but found the ones in the first game insanely frustrating, I do miss some of the more outlandish and clever solutions that the first two games had. These ones feel a lot more straightforward, and even though you do have a map now that can help you locate where things are, I never really felt like I needed the map. I felt like most of the Somniums, even if they weren't a straight line, had kind of a hallway philosophy. Like, they make it pretty obvious where the next observable thing is, and you really never have to explore or move the camera too much to figure out what you're doing. Only if you're trying to find the hidden eyeballs within the Somnium do you really have to worry too much about camera angles. So if you're the type of person that loves exploring in 3D, that's more so what the escape rooms are for. Whereas these are a lot more linear and also, frankly, kind of a cakewalk. There was only one Somnium where I died because you have a 6-minute time limit, and that was because I wanted to search for the hidden eyeballs. Had I not done that, I probably would have gotten through it pretty quickly. So I don't know if that just means they took the feedback from the previous games and now it's much easier, or if I'm just getting better. But either way, I found that the escape rooms had way more of an appropriate challenge, and these were just like, okay, I've seen most of their tricks, so let's move on. One thing that I find disappointing is that you primarily control young women, and there's no option to change their clothes, and both of them, again, modesty is subjective, but I think most people would probably say that their outfits are more on the suggestive side. Whereas in Nirvana Initiative, you can unlock new clothing, and you could also purchase some via DLC that could make the characters dress more modestly, but there is nothing of the sort here. But the biggest thing I was hoping for out of this game were that the bonuses would be worth it. Because after you beat the game, you're able to use the eyeballs that you collect in Somniums for doing things like finishing within the time limit, as you can sometimes go over the time limit if you make a certain choice, or by finding the hidden eyeballs. And these eyeballs are used to purchase various things like concept art, digital magazines that feel like excerpts straight out of 999 with their pixelated graphics and the way the text crawls along the screen. But in Nirvana Initiative, there were a couple of bonuses in particular that I don't want to spoil, but they really, really did an amazing callback to Zero Escape, and it was one of the main reasons why that ended up being my Game of the Year of 2022. Unfortunately, the post-game is quite disappointing in this game. It doesn't even have nearly the impact that it did, and it actually left me feeling kind of frustrated, because I was like, that's it? 3 years it's been since Nirvana Initiative, and you took a step backwards? Speaking of taking a step backwards, I kind of feel like that's the overall theme of this entire game. The escape rooms were an absolute blast to solve, and it was really great seeing a lot of these familiar characters again, even if I feel like a lot of them that had major roles in the previous game are now reduced to cameos. But I do find that the story was very lackluster. There was really only one twist that I thought was passable, but even then it was like, man, even the worst twists in the previous games were so much better. Another thing that's kind of disappointing is that the previous games, you would have multiple timelines that you would jump through, and some timelines would give you information to help progress through another, which is kind of a trademark of pretty much every game Uchikoshi works on. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. The alternate endings are about as close as you can get, but again, they only take a couple of seconds, and most of them are just click on an object enough or exhaust the dialogue box. There are no alternate solutions to the puzzles, which is probably why I got the sense that the Somniums felt like hallways, and the story is also much shorter than the previous games, so right when I thought the game was at the middle part, it was actually nearing the climax, and it felt like, oh, that's it? That ended way quicker than I was expecting. Not to say the story is bad, the setup is great, and I do love the way the game builds up the intrigue and the suspense, setting up red herrings, but the payoff is significantly less than what you would expect in the other games, and the game overall has much more of a lighthearted, airy feeling to it. Like, the previous games could get pretty darn intense. And this game, most of its M-ratedness is just going to come from all the pervy jokes, which I wonder if they just snuck in there because they realized the game would have otherwise been a T, and they're like, oh, we are Spike Chunsoft. We are incapable of releasing a game that's rated T. We gotta make everything we do M and have a bunch of sexualization jokes, and ugh, drives me crazy. But if you like escape rooms, then I think this is one of the best options you can get outside of the Zero Escape series. Even the Somniums, to a certain extent, have a joy to them once you figure out the dream logic, and sometimes Aiba's remarks can be relatively funny, even if I feel like the heights of craziness that they got from the previous games aren't quite replicated here. Now, I played this on the Switch too, and as far as I could tell, there weren't too many noticeable differences between the previous two games I played on Switch 1. From what I've heard, you can use the mouse mode for certain things, which makes a lot of sense, because a lot of the game does feel like it was made for PC first. As you move around a cursor in the investigations, and sometimes you'll have to click on specific things in the escape rooms. I haven't tested this yet, but I feel like that would be one of the few good uses of mouse mode that I can think of. But it still doesn't feel like it takes advantage of the full power of the Switch 2. The graphics look more or less exactly the same as they did in the previous games, right down to the character models' expressions and the very low poly textures. I have heard that it is quite looking by visual novel standards, but from someone who's been playing a lot of really polished Nintendo games like Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, this kind of feels insulting to the eyes compared to those games. But you do have the option to switch between performance and quality. And as someone who always chooses performance mode, the game did feel like it ran very snappily. It didn't really have too many loading screens, if any, and the few that they had were maybe like a second and a half long. And the camera felt like it moved really smoothly, and it didn't feel like the game was choppy at all. Like, there were a few moments that caused the previous games to really tank in performance, but I didn't really notice anything here. That being said, if you have a Switch 2, both of the games are the same price, whether you get it on the Switch 1 or the Switch 2. So if you just don't feel the need to upgrade, I'm pretty sure the Switch 1 version will run just fine. It might just have slightly worse performance. And I do think $40 is a decent price for this kind of game. I do feel like it's short enough where it just does not deserve the $60. But at the same time, the escape rooms are so well crafted and the voice acting is so good, apart from the fact that they really butchered the sound mixing in this game, where like sometimes it felt like the actors were talking too quiet in one line and then too loud at the next. But the actual voice acting itself on display was very good, even if the story wasn't as emotional as the previous game, so the actors couldn't display the full range that they could have if they were put in the more intense situations of the past. Even though this is probably my least favorite Somnium Files game by a long shot, I still enjoyed the escape rooms enough that it gave me such a dopamine rush. And I think you will like it too. I think that you would probably be better off if you played the other games first, but at the same time went into this knowing that even though it's a lesser experience, don't go into it looking for a groundbreaking narrative, more so a groundbreaking escape room series. I can't believe I'm saying this for a Spike Chunsoft game, but story is very much the afterthought here, but at least there is a story. That's more than what Mario Kart World can say. So I do think this is worth $40. Maybe wait for it to go on sale if the lack of a compelling story is really a problem for you. But I had a good time with this. My friend Kara gave me a gift card for my birthday, so I only paid $7, and I do think that was worth the money. So if you can get it there, that'd be cool. Otherwise, both versions are rentable on GameFly, although I'm pretty sure the Switch 2 version is only a key card, so do keep that in mind. Either way, you're in for a blast as long as you come in with relatively realistic temptations. So with that, thank you very much for watching, my friends. I do not have time to say my usual outro because Esabelle is in trouble. So let's hurry up and get to her on time. Wish me luck.
Oh, oh.
Phew. Paul must have heard my distress signal in time. I guess I can continue streaming The Legend of Hilda VR. Oh.